Hello and welcome back to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video we're going to be concentrating on the functions and role of the theme Selfishness across the play and in Spectacles by J.B. Priestley. And before I go any further, I'd like to encourage you to join my tribe by hitting subscribe for things English, literary and grammatical. So let's get into it. Selfishness across this play is a devastating and dramatic theme. Each character is interrogated by the inspector and proven to be acting in their own interest, at least at the start of the play. But the behaviours each of these characters demonstrates at the start of the play is endemic of the wider society that Priestley is pointing out. These Edwardian characters are informing the judgment of a post-war audience who are pushed to question what sort of society they want to live in and be a part of after these two devastating world wars. So much of Priestley's judgment, used through the mouthpiece of the inspector, is flagging what fairness needs to look like and is informed by his very clear political values. For us to get a true grip on Priestley's intentions, we have to come to the heart of understanding the political and economic system he wanted to challenge. Because ultimately, capitalism is in part responsible for Eva Smith's downward spiral. So capitalism, described by capitalists like Mr. Burling, functions to ensure that each man strives to prosper as best they can, and that every individual has an equal opportunity to make their own money and make their own prosperity. Yet for someone like Priestley, who saw himself as a socialist, he believed that actually capitalism meant that the wealthy held a ransom, if you like, a gun to the head of the most impoverished. And as a consequence, victims like Eva Smith were ultimately at the mercy of the wealthy, as we see throughout the way that this story unfolds about the way she is shamelessly abused by each of the privileged characters we encounter through the inspector. The bold claim that Eva Smith is on her downward spiral because of these characters does come down to capitalist struggles around money. We first encounter her as an employee who is laid off by Mr. Burling because he rages against the strike that she is a part of. Without the minimum wage, well, Mr. Burling can decide exactly how he chooses to set his wages. And after all, he sees himself as a hard-headed, practical man of business. Now, we may be presuming it's not hard-headedness, but hard-heartedness that means he lays off Eva Smith. It's also the contrast of the opening scene that we are shown in this play. We've got the images of champagne glasses clinking. We see a sparkling ring for engagement. We also see the servant, Edna, in her finery. We know that this shocking and obvious display of wealth that he and his family are enjoying is intensely differing to the struggle that women and people like Eva Smith suffered. The simple question we're forced to ask when we see the riches around them is, why won't he raise wages? Is it right for self-interested men or characters like this to make those decisions? We also see another attack of the class system wielded by Priestley as characterised through Eric. He's born into money without earning it, and he believes he has a right to anything he so chooses, which is surely acting in selfish interest. In Act 3, we learn that he believes he had a right to Eva or Daisy's body when he says, "I was in a state where a chap easily turns nasty." I think it's interesting that he doesn't expose the true shame of his inability to state outright that he forced himself on her at this point. Instead, the adverb easily is used interchangeably to suggest that he's in an induced state where alcohol has played a part in his actions. If you like, it negates his opportunity to say, "I made that poor choice." He got what he wanted. I think this also echoes and mirrors what Gerald also does in justifying his actions. He says he didn't ask her for anything. So here, wealth and status have influence over a vulnerable person, in this case, a vulnerable woman. And we are meant to feel like Gerald is a genuine, selfless individual through this. So the question I have here is, well, he didn't ask for anything, but this was a very unbalanced, unfair relationship where we are led to believe there may have been sexual favours as if she were a mistress. Anything implies innocence. And when we learn later in his reference to that time in his life that Eva Daisy had never been happier, the comparative happier is really shocking. It's even more so in that we know that it wasn't just a transactional relationship. This was an emotional fall from grace as much as it was an actual economic one. He was prepared to let her go. And so it's not just that his selfish actions had consequences, actually it's that the emotional well-being of this character is affected too, which is surely another dimension to selfishness. Just acting in your own convenience, not thinking of others' emotions. At the heart of the question of selfishness is the importance of responsibility. When characters such as Mr. and Mrs. Burling and Gerald are fixated on whether the inspector is or is not real, we understand that the moral consequences of their inability to accept responsibility are telling. They are unable to disengage their selfishness. And by the end of the play, when we really acknowledge that the inspector could well have been real, we're forced again to review their actions, as demonstrated through Gerald. Let me take you back to Act 2, when he trusts the word of the inspector. Gerald says, in that case, as I'm rather more upset by this business. The use of hyphens in the script offer us an insight into how this character would say these words. There's a sense he's suppressing emotion. The distance of by this business, the noun business here, acknowledging that this has some consequence. But then we see before the expose of the inspector and now afterwards when they question the credibility of the inspector. Gerald says in Act 3, everything's all right now, Sheila. What about this ring? Instead, we go back to the selfish Gerald of old, who wants to align his family with hers, reduce competition, take over more power maybe. And it's all about a ring, an engagement ring. The casual nature and the callous style of everything's all right now. Sheila's been changed. She says, it frightens me the way you talk. The verb frightens acknowledges the distance between her and her reflective side and him and his selfish side. And then finally, I want to take you all the way back to Act 1, when we really want to see a glimpse into the selfishness of Gerald. Sheila says, is this the one you wanted me to have? In reference to the ring. The one you wanted me to have. It's all about Gerald even then. So he can chart his selfishness. But Priestley's really stating that selfishness has consequences. I love the way Priestley stages the lighting in the opening of the play. The pink light representing contentment, maybe joy, maybe love at the news of Sheila and Gerald's engagement, is shattered as soon as the inspector arrives on stage. We're informed that, well, he's bringing to light all of the selfish behaviours of these characters, and that's symbolic of the harder, brighter lighting that's exposing their sin. Priestley throws shade on selfishness, but he's exposing it in such a clear operation. We cannot deny what impact this has if we can only look, learn, and listen. If Priestley is speaking to a post-war audience, he wants them to look harder, be brighter the generations before. And it's clearer than ever that this message translates all the way through to us today if we can only understand the selfish motivations that drive each character. Why not subscribe to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar for all things English, literary and grammatical?